Well, good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson tonight. So the left has finally found the only immigrant in history who had no right to come to America. The only one who didn't improve the place by his presence. His name? Christopher Columbus. His crime? Violating the sovereignty of the people who lived here already. Plus, he was the wrong ethnicity. Now, try making that argument about any other immigrant to America and see how long you keep your job. But whatever. Happy Columbus Day anyway. Enjoy it while you can. Your grandchildren won't even know it existed. Progressives had declared war on Christopher Columbus, as they have on most things older than last week. This is year zero on the revolutionary calendar. History starts now. Ignorance of the past isn't simply tolerated, it's required. Does your average protester know anything about Christopher Columbus? That he's celebrated as a hero throughout much of Latin America, for example? Of course not. The left speaks only of Columbus's genocide, mostly because his ships brought old world diseases to the New World. Of course, those ships returned to Europe with syphilis and tobacco, which proves only that real history is more complicated than the childish theology your kids are now learning in school. Now, you could make those arguments to liberals if you wanted to, but save your breath. They don't care, because none of this is really about Christopher Columbus. What we're watching is a full-scale assault from within on the West itself, its history, its political and intellectual legacy. It's not a debate where one side tries to convince the other. It's a war, with one side trying to erase all remnants of its opponent, in this case, Western civilization. Consider what happened recently at a sleepy academic journal called Third World Quarterly. Professor Bruce Gilley of Portland State University published a paper there entitled "The Case for Colonialism." Professor Gilley argued that Western colonization of the world, while flawed, obviously, was, quote, objectively beneficial. He noted that countries that have embraced Western institutions left behind by the colonial powers have succeeded, while countries dominated by anti-colonial ideologies have not succeeded, to put it mildly. Now, you might agree with his thesis or you might disagree, but in this current moment of revolutionary fervor, you're not even allowed to have thoughts like that. Gilley's paper has since been pulled after half the publication's board resigned in protest of it. Keep in mind, nobody alleged plagiarism here or inaccuracy. They just didn't like the conclusion, so they silenced the person who wrote it. Reason, tolerance, free inquiry, those are Western civilization's central gifts to this world. It shouldn't surprise us that in places where the West is under attack, those very principles are under attack too. So when they come for the Columbus statue in your town, it's worth fighting back, because it's not about the statue. It's about something much deeper. Jason Nichols is a professor at the University of Maryland, and he joins us tonight. Professor, thanks a lot for coming on.
Thank you, Tucker. Good to see you again.
Good to see you. So people are upset about Columbus. Here's the lens through which I view this. Here you have an immigrant from a Spanish-speaking country coming to this continent for a better life, and you're saying he's not welcome here.
Hello, everyone. I'm Kimberly Guilfoyle, along with Juan Williams, Jesse Waters, Jillian Turner,
Tucker,
and Greg
let me
Gutfeld. It's 5 o'clock in New York
your
City,
lens a little
and
bit.
this is the
We
Five.
have a person coming from outside of our borders, coming and terrorizing and killing 250,000
A new push on immigration.
American
President Trump is
citizens in 2
reaching
years.
across the aisle
We'd
to
probably
strike a
call that
deal
person a terrorist, correct? Those are the people that we don't want in our country. Those are the bad immigrants. Those are who we vet and try to keep out.
Okay. Well, I hate to give a history lesson to a professor, but Columbus did not kill 200,000 people.
Oh, no.
What you're referring to were the viruses that Columbus and his crew in subsequent waves of explorers and immigrants from Europe brought to the New World that decimated the native population, which is obviously a tragedy. From what you're
Tucker, I'm also talking about European brutality. Also, he laid the map basically for the transatlantic slave trade. He was the first person to take captives across the Atlantic. Yeah. So again, he was part of things that I think as Americans we don't stand for.
Well, I think that's right. I mean, you're aware. I mean, not to get into the history of it, but that slavery was pre-existing in the Americas. The native population here practiced slavery, as I'm sure you know. My only point.
To the transatlantic.
I'm not even here to. I'm not defending Columbus. I don't need to. He's not a relative of mine. He's been dead for 500 years. I just want to make 2 points. One, that history is a lot more complex than the theologians who are mishandling it in our current age will admit. It's very complicated stuff. People are complicated. And second, this is not really about Columbus. It's about attacking Western civilization, European influence on the Americas. And before you do that, you should think through the implications of it, don't you think?
So, I view it very differently. I think that this is about people like Columbus. I mean, we don't go and talk about people who killed 200,000 people through whatever means and enslaved people. Columbus, on one occasion, actually, for a man who stole corn, he cut off his ears and nose and sold him into slavery. Is that the kind of brutality that we represent? I really don't think so.
No, it's not. But hold on. I think you'll concede that in 15th century North America, as in 15th century Europe, brutality was universal, and it's appalling. And I would never defend any of it. Thank God I don't have to. But to pretend that he was the only one committing it is ahistorical and wrong. And I think as a professor, you would acknowledge that. So let's just put it in, as you would say as a guy on the left, into some context here. Fair?
Well, listen, now, I'm not saying he's the only person committing violence. That would be like saying Osama bin Laden is the only terrorist.
Right,
we actually have many people who have committed, atrocities throughout history. But I think, when we talk about historical context, one thing never changes. Killing massive amounts of people, facilitating the rape and murder of lots of people is never acceptable. We don't ever talk about Hitler in positive terms or Leopold or any of these people or Stalin who have killed numerous people.
But it's not really about Columbus. It's not about Columbus, an Italian who was acting on behalf of the Spanish government. Again, I've got nothing in common with him. I don't have to defend him. But the subsequent waves of Europeans who came to this country obviously hurt a lot of the indigenous population, but also had a pretty great effect on the continent. I mean, they turned it into America, which to this day is a beacon of hope for the world. That's why everyone wants to come here. So you're trying to delegitimize that. And let's be honest about that.
Again, I disagree. First of all, if we're talking about the mainland of the United States, Columbus never made it here. So when we're talking about people who came, the Europeans who came to Ellis Island and other places, I think that that influence, we can say for the most part has been positive, though they've done, some good things, some bad things. I don't think there's any American who would sit here and say, oh, we shouldn't have any Europeans here in the United States. But when they come and
I think there probably are people on this very show who would say that, but thank God you're not one of them. Really quick, I'm baffled by this. So this Indigenous Peoples Day, I'm totally for Indigenous peoples, though, of course, no one's really indigenous. They came here across the land bridge like everybody else. However, I'm not against that. I'm just wondering, no, we're all immigrants, including the American Indians, as you know. But my question to you is, all these people are suddenly in love with the native population of America. I don't see them sending any money to the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in South Dakota, which is basically the poorest place on the continent. Why is that? It's all kind of theoretical and all these symbolic gestures of support, but like no actual support. Have you noticed that?
So I think that there's more that many of us can do to help our communities. I think that the debt really to the indigenous people is owed by the United States government. They're the people who owe
well, they've spent a lot. They've spent an awful lot. It hasn't helped. But hold on. Why are you offloading the responsibility on the government? You're calling for Indigenous Peoples Day.
I'm not offloading.
Why don't you send a check for 10 grand to Indigenous peoples? I bet they'd appreciate it. I know they would, in fact, having spoken to them.
Well, maybe if you give me your job, I'll have that 10 grand. But I'll tell you what. It's not the average American that removed indigenous people from their homes during the Trail of Tears. That was the United States government and actually somebody who President Trump praised. Those are the acts of the government who owes the indigenous people.
Let me ask you really quick. Are you aware that and I think the Trail of Tears is appalling, and I'm not defending it, obviously. One of the many bad things our government has done. But are you aware that the Indians brought their slaves with them on the Trail of Tears? Did you know that?
I am absolutely aware.
Just because history is complicated, that's the only point I'm making. Professor, thank you for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Tucker.
Joe Piscopo is the host of Piscopo in the Morning. He's been defending Columbus statues in New York from demolition. A lonely voice, but a brave one, and he joins us tonight. Joe, why should we care about Columbus?
Because it's the iconic symbol for Italian Americans throughout North America, certainly in the United States. I can't believe we're even worrying about this, tearing statues down. Tucker, there's so many things happening in the world. The fires in California, Las Vegas, the hurricanes, Puerto Rico. I mean, this is all they got to worry about, is taking down a statue of Christopher Columbus. Again, it's people with too much time on their hands. This is a great symbol, and you broke it down beautifully and who Columbus was. This is a great symbol for the Italian-American community, number one. Number two, Columbus, by today's standard, would be like an astronaut. What he did was the equivalent of going to the moon. Was he flawed? We've talked about this before, Tucker, on your show. Of course he was flawed. We're all flawed. Who are we to judge? But he's the iconic symbol for Italian-Americans, and we have had it. We've been so disrespected, and we're just not going to take it anymore, Tucker.
I thought Tony Soprano kind of summed this up as succinctly as anybody could on his show years ago when he said he's a hero. That's it. End of conversation. How do we go? And I thought that was kind of the state of play on Columbus. How do we go from there to here?
I can't figure it out. And, you know, what is the reason? If there was a solution, and Tucker, you're like I am on the radio show. You have to be solution-based.
Yeah.
What is the end game? What is the solution? You want to take it down. You want to take the statue down. There's no reason for it. And for us, and I've said this before, the fact that that statue was built in 1892 with the nickels and the dimes and literally the quarters of immigrants from Italy that came to America, proud to be American, learned the language, learned the laws. All they wanted to do, all my grandparents wanted to do, was for us to be Americans. And that's what that symbol is for. This was a bold explorer. Did he have faults? Was he flawed? Of course. But I tell you, and I want to be nice. I'm going to be nice here, Tucker. You know what I'm saying? The olive branch is out. But if they want to mess with the Italians, I'm telling you, you're going to have a problem. Do they really think in the city of New York that you're going to take down a statue of Christopher Columbus? If you think so, then you got a problem. It ain't going to happen.
So here's my question, though. Have you seen any votes on this? I mean, this is supposedly a democracy. It's not just a fiefdom run by people who got rich in early Google investing. Like, there are voters here, and they thought they were in control. Has anybody actually voted on this anywhere?
It's a great observation. Nobody. There was some of the speaker of the New York City Council said, we're going to tear the statue down. Then the mayor de Blasio said, okay, we're going to have like this commission. Now, we were on the Columbus Day Parade, and I was with Maria Bartiromo, you know, and Maria's great. And I had Governor Cuomo on one side, right? And I had Maria on the other side. So the local television station I was on told me, nothing political, Joe, nothing political, you know? So I'm trying to be politically correct. Maria went right for it. She said, look, there's an elephant in the room. They're tearing down the statue. Governor Cuomo, what do you think? And it was great. And here the governor goes, the statue should stay up. It's a symbol of Italian-American unity, all that we worked for. And Governor Cuomo was quite elegant in that. So I thank Maria for bringing that up, because I didn't have the guts to do it. Thank you.
She's my favorite. Joe Piscopo, thanks. Great to see you.
Thank you. Keep the fight, Tucker. Love you, man.
President Trump unveiled a 70-point immigration plan. Could it be what's needed to fix the immigration crisis? We'll discuss it with one of the president's critics. That's coming up. Plus, we'll talk to a former New York Times reporter who says Hollywood suppressed reports about Harvey Weinstein's sexual misconduct for more than a decade, and so did some in the press. Sharon Waxman in just a minute. So last month, President Trump met with Nancy Pelosi in the House, Chuck Schumer in the Senate, and apparently negotiated a deal to provide amnesty for DACA beneficiaries with a few concessions in return. Now, all of that has changed all of a sudden. The administration has now put forward a 70-point immigration plan, which calls for easier deportations of people here illegally, a border wall, or a partial border wall anyway, and new limits on chain migration, which is the idea that once you get here, all of your relatives can come. Those are all preconditions for any future amnesty of DACA beneficiaries. Could this be the beginning of real immigration reform? Ethan Behrman hosts a radio program in L.A. He thinks a lot about this, and he joins us tonight. Ethan, thanks a lot for coming on.
Thanks, Tucker.
So I guess I would just make 2 points. And the first is the most obvious one, which is Trump ran on all this stuff. So it's not like, A, it's a surprise, or B, it hasn't already been ratified by voters. I mean, government's legitimacy comes from voters. Voters hear about something, they get to decide yay or nay. We just had an election about this. So for Trump to say, I want a wall, well, gee whiz, you know, he said it like 1,000 times during the campaign. I'm not really sure why the Congress has the moral authority to deny something that voters want or said they wanted. See?
Oh, but the legislative branch is also elected by the voters, and the way our government is set up with the three branches, the legislative branch, by the way the Constitution says, that's where the bills start. Taxing and spending clause comes from Congress. So they're the ones who are responsible for it, and they're responsible to their voters, not on a national scale.
But I mean, they act like, I can't believe a wall, it's so big. Well, here's what Congressman Luis Gutierrez, who actually is kind of an extremist, and I don't use that term very often, but I think he qualifies. Here's what he said about these 70 points, all of which you've heard before. But you haven't heard him say this. I think we have a graphic of this. He said, it's an extension of the white supremacist agenda. What they want to do is criminalize and delegitimize Latinos. Now, you can agree or disagree with some of the details, but there's nothing explicitly racial in these 70 points. They apply to people from any country on the globe of a variety of hues. To say something like that whips people into a frenzy of race hatred. Like, can you agree that rhetoric like that is out of bounds?
Well, that is a little beyond what I would say about the wall and the immigration plan and principles put forth by the White House. I would not go that far with it. But let's be honest, the vast majority of people who are here without proper documentation speak other languages, have darker skin. So there would be an undue burden on people of darker skin. But I'm not saying it's white supremacy at all. That went too far. But let's get into some of the details, though, Tucker. I mean, we're talking about heading toward a deportation
force. It's an undue burden on people who are here illegally. The missing ingredient in this recipe, and I keep thinking this, is what about Americans who are already here? A lot of whom are recent immigrants of different hues, by the way. Members of minority groups making disproportionately less. They're more affected by this than I am, for example. What about them? I never hear anyone on the left mention American citizens and whether any of this is good or bad for them. Ever. I never hear that. Why?
Well, we do know that it overall can be very good, especially here in California. We have entire industries dependent on some of these workers that would be impacted. That's why when we talk about implementing E-Verify, we have to have functioning work visa programs in place to not destroy the agriculture industry. For example, Tucker, if you like to eat lettuce, that's coming from California. That's coming from Monterey County. We need workers to pick the lettuce. We need workers to pick the strawberries. Americans aren't doing that job. It is actually undocumented workers. So let's get a work visa program in place so they can do those jobs.
If you were to say, look, you know, I make sweatshirts and I do so in a sweatshop in Indonesia using 11-year-olds who are chained to their sewing machines. And if you knock out child labor, I may have to pay $6 extra for a sweatshirt, so we can't have that. When did liberals start defending the exploitation of cheap labor? I don't know. When did that happen?
No, I want to get... Well, I don't. What I do is I say I want people out of the shadows so they're not abused and they're not subjugated by unscrupulous people who take advantage of them while they're here working. By the way, one of the advantages of a long-term change here with increased minimum wages is you're going to see Silicon Valley fill that void. John Deere just bought a huge deal. It was over $300 million to buy a company that makes the lettuce bot to automate some of that. So there are long-term trends that are happening here as well. But why do we want to be as mean as possible? I find that to be not very American to say, let's round people up.
I mean, look, I like immigrants, and for the 50th time, I actually really do. I grew up in California. I like them. I think they're hardworking and nice people.
Yep.
But I think our primary responsibility is to Americans. But I wonder, as a macro question, if we're automating a lot of these jobs, and you just said we're going to, why do we need 1.1 million legal low-skilled workers every year and an unknown but high number of illegal ones? What's the point? What are they going to do exactly? If jobs are going away, why are we importing all these people? Has anyone ever stopped to ask that question?
Well, actually, I mean, so net illegal immigration has been flat for a period of time. Actually, it's been going down under President Trump with his rhetoric. So I think long term, we do have solutions here. Let us implement E-Verify. Let's get worker visa programs in place. Let's deal with the dreamers appropriately. And I think long term, you're absolutely right. There are long term solutions to this. But short term, why do we have to be anti-American and round people up? That is reminiscent of a period of European history that is very unpleasant.
You know the truth. There's no economic justification for mass low-wage immigration. There's none. Nobody even tries to defend it. It's about votes. But given the jobs are going away, why would you shut this down right now? It's hurting Americans. It's lowering their wages. Why are we going along with this?
The evidence is not showing that it is hurting Americans' wages. There have been studies showing that that's not the net effect of what is happening with undocumented workers in this country in the first place. But I agree with you. I think we need to look at it at a broad scale, but we can do it without immediately negatively impacting not just 11 million people, but the communities around them, our neighbors, our friends.
Ethan, thank you for coming on tonight. Appreciate it. Harvey Weinstein, the producer, had a tough week. He's been publicly exposed as a sexual predator, to put it mildly, but Hollywood and the press apparently knew this for a long time but didn't tell us. Why is that? And then actor Dean Cain will be here to tell us his experiences in Hollywood and try to explain the silence that emanated from that town. Stay tuned. Hollywood producer Harvey Weinstein was fired yesterday by his own film studio. This is after the New York Times wrote a lengthy couple of pieces revealing he'd been repeatedly accused, incredibly accused, of sexual harassment by a lot of different women over the past several decades. Sharon Waxman spent a long time writing for the New York Times. She left to start The Wrap. She says the paper could have revealed Weinstein's alleged misdeeds all the way back in 2004, but spiked the piece instead. Sharon Waxman joins us tonight. Sharon, thanks for coming on. So,
sure.
So to what extent did they have the story, are you saying, in 2004?
Yeah, so first of all, just one nuance, which is I said the piece was gutted, not spiked. The piece did run, but there was no reference to sexual anything or women in the piece. Clearly, the piece that Jodi Kantor and Megan Twohey wrote last week was really a great piece of reporting, a lot of work. I had a piece of that story 13 years ago. And I was really very disappointed that we weren't able to get it into print. What appeared in print was a piece that was buried on the inside of the culture section, and it's basically talked about a Miramax executive. Miramax was the company that Harvey and Bob Weinstein had started originally, and it was owned by the Disney company at that time, and it was talked about him being on the payroll but then being fired. And it was kind of a confusing story if you didn't understand that what the role that person actually played was as a procurer for Harvey. That was what my sources had told me, and I'd gone to Rome, I'd gone to Italy to find that story based on tips that I'd gotten, and I convinced my editor at the time to send me, and then a new editor came in, and that editor kind of inherited the story. And what appeared in print, after a great deal of pressure and pushback from Harvey Weinstein, as he always did when there was any negative story in the wings, he pushed back really hard.
Why did nobody write that story subsequently? I mean, it sounds, I knew nothing about this, but it sounds like from all the accounts I've read, this was widely known. Is that true?
I would say that there were always rumors about sexual misconduct. I don't think that anybody knew that there was harassment of any kind inside the company. That was not the reputation, but actresses. And there were stories out there, and there were many of us who tried to get them. I, in fact, did speak to one woman who had been paid off on that same trip in London, but she really wouldn't tell me anything that I could publish. So that part of that piece of the story that I got was not in any form, because she, of course, had signed a non-disclosure. She was terrified of saying anything, but yet I knew she existed, but I didn't know exactly what had happened. You know, all I knew that there was a payoff. Certainly nothing that I could put into print. But the other piece of the story that I had reported could have started the conversation, could have exposed a piece of it. And in fact, you know, the story the New York Times ultimately ran goes back 30 years. So you're talking about a lot of past offenses that I think could have been perhaps, I mean, what I wonder is, you know, could some of this, the more recent, you know, things that happen, might any of that have been avoided had the New York Times published what I had in my notebooks 13 years ago?
I mean, I guess it's unknowable, but common sense suggests, of course it could have been avoided. I mean, that's a big forum. If you print a story like that, you know, it has effects. I wish they'd run your piece. Sharon Waxman, thank you for explaining that to us. I appreciate it.
Thanks.
Dean Cain is an actor and producer, knows that world really well, and he joins us tonight. Dean, was this story a shock to you?
Not in the least, Tucker. I mean, you hear rumors about this, that, the other thing. This was the worst kept secret in Hollywood. There's no question about it.
I mean, it's hard for me to, I mean, as cynical as I am about the left, it's still hard for me to believe that a community that's constantly talking about empowering women and the horrors of sexual harassment could have it at this scale. This is not like gray area stuff. This is ridiculous, out of control stuff, and not do anything about it for 30 years. But that's what happened.
Well, yeah, Hollywood loves to wave the self-righteous finger and tell everybody what they should be doing and what's going on. But this is not known as the bastion of morality here in Hollywood. People want a leg up. Harvey Weinstein is an extremely powerful man, an absolute bully, and he clearly had an MO and something that he did. I mean, you were aware of it. Everybody knew. I wasn't someone that would be a target for him, but, it's something that he had done for a long time. I know him socially. I've seen him in a couple situations. I'm not surprised at all that it's come out. I like to hear that some people are finally saying something. Rose McGowan tweeting, "Women of Hollywood, your silence is deafening." I agree with her, finally, and at least one late night guy, John Oliver, made a joke, but everyone's been really quiet because Harvey is known to be a fighter. He's going after whoever he can go after, and he'll do it in the most vicious of ways, so people are scared.
Just for our viewers who haven't read the series, and by the way, I think this stuff is usually more complicated than it gets credit for being, but this is not like he pressured a woman to have dinner with him. This is he exposed himself repeatedly to a bunch of different people identified by name for real stuff. So what I don't get is why Saturday Night Live, for example, refused to do any joke about it at all. And then when asked, Lorne Michaels, the executive producer of the show, said it's a New York thing, whatever that means. What does that mean, and why haven't they covered this?
Well, I don't know. I thought President Trump was from New York, and they've done a couple pieces on him. I think the deal is that there needed to be a huge public outcry like this, and there is finally this thing happening. This might be the thing that happens. I mean, his apology letter was ridiculous. That was absolutely ridiculous. Said he's going to fight the NRA now and go do that. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. He isn't arguing that things happened, that he did things that were wrong, because there's too many people out there. People sign non-disclosure agreements, and he's done it with legal maneuvering, but there's too many people. The landslide is there. So I think this week you're going to see a whole different world. I think you're going to see Kimmel. I think you're going to see Colbert. They're going to do bits and pieces on it, and I think it's finally going to be out there in the open. And I hope people. I mean, there's such hypocrisy in this to scream about women's rights and all these things, and then and he is this big supporter of it. Yet he's doing this, and it's clear. You see the MO. You see what he's doing. Bring him up to the hotel room. Watch me take a shower. It's awful.
So I think the most striking part for me is in his explanation letter. It wasn't exactly an apology letter. He talks mostly about himself and his personal journey and his therapist and working through his issues. And I thought, this is the single most self-involved person I've ever come across. Is that what the culture's like out there, where you just talk about yourself without ceasing?
Well, let me tell you about me, Tucker. No. Yeah, it's true. It is. It's Hollywood. It's Hollywood. That's what happens. People are very self-absorbed out here, and they're worried about their own position and their grasp on power. A lot of actors, boy, if they're not in the spotlight right now, they're forgotten about, and they don't want that to happen. It's the same with producers. Harvey's not a filmmaker. He's a producer. He's not directing films and doing things like that. He's a producer, and he had a lot of power. He could make or break your career. So he just became this power mogul. People would just excuse his behavior because they wanted to get ahead. It's that same old Hollywood story.
Pretty disgusting. Dean Cain, you're a brave man to talk about that in public. Thank you for doing it. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Tucker.
Up next, a Republican law professor says that enough is enough and we need new gun control measures after what happened in Las Vegas. What exactly should those be? That professor joins us next. Plus, Mike Pence showed how disgusted he was by the NFL player protest by walking out of a game. Up ahead, we'll talk to a lawmaker who has a far more ambitious idea: cut off the league's tax breaks, its taxpayer subsidies. More on that ahead. Well, liberals responded to the Las Vegas massacre with horror, like everyone else, but also with unrelenting pleas to just do something, though few of them graced us with specifics on that and told us what they want lawmakers to actually do. Even fewer can explain how doing something will prevent another attack like the one we just saw. Leading the charge to do something is Richard Painter. He's a law professor at the University of Minnesota. He's a former ethics lawyer for the Bush administration. Painter expressed his outrage on Twitter, saying, quote, "Americans are sick of political hacks talking about condolences and sympathy while stuffing NRA blood money in their pockets, period. Do something." He continued, we can all pray about it, but we elected you to do something to protect us. What you were doing to fix our permissive gun laws, ? Then he finished this way, enough BS. For thoughts and prayers, call a priest or rabbi. For decent gun laws, call a congressman. If he doesn't do anything, sack him. Well, Painter is obviously concerned about gun violence, but what solution does he propose? Richard Painter joins us tonight. Richard Painter, great to see you. You're a smart man. I know we went to the same high school. I've known you for a long time. I saw these tweets, and my first thought was, Richard Painter has a solution that he's keeping from the rest of us. And so I'm inviting you on tonight to tell us what it is.
Well, I don't think anybody's going to come up with a solution that's going to eliminate all gun violence. But we have a lot of it. This keeps happening. At a minimum, we ought to have information on people like Mr. Paddock, who are acquiring dozens of weapons over a very short period of time. It amazes me that the police didn't know that he was acquiring that many weapons over such a short period of time.
Okay,
that
so let's stop there. So since you're a law professor, I know that you can handle specific questions. How many weapons in what period of time should trigger a visit to your house from authorities?
I am not an expert on what the threshold ought to be. I think that's up to law enforcement, and that's not the only factor that they would consider.
It's not up to law enforcement. It's not up to law enforcement. Nothing is up to law enforcement. It's up to voters to decide what the laws are, and then law enforcement, of course, enforces them by definition. So,
well, they visit your house.
You said
visit your house if the music is too loud. I mean, they'll visit your house if they think there's something to be concerned about. Just ask questions.
So look, I guess what struck me was not your concern, which of course I share, and your love of country, which I share, and I think all of our viewers too, but your claim, explicit claim, that this could have been solved by laws. You said that repeatedly and suggested that anyone who didn't agree with you had, quote, blood money in their pockets, which is a heavy thing to say. So again, what specific law are you calling for?
We can talk about the NRA blood money, what they've done to the Republican Party, or we can talk about the solutions. I'll focus now on the solution.
I want you to talk about the solutions. That's why I wanted. Okay. So, but what are they? You still haven't told me.
Law enforcement ought to know if someone has acquired dozens of weapons, and they can use that information along with other information. For example, is the person associating with known terrorists? Is the person associating with the Ku Klux Klan? Is the person somebody who appears to be psychologically unsettled? They can use that information along with other information to check out the facts, and they do not need a law to go pay you a visit in your house and say, hello, what's up, what's going on? Is he a gun collector? Is he a dealer? There might be a good reason to be purchasing dozens of weapons over a short period of time. There might be a bad reason. It turned out this guy had a very bad reason, but this is not a well...
buy too many guns, the police should come visit them and ask them why they have the guns, and then do what?
That depends on the circumstances.
Well, how about in this case, the specific circumstance you were tweeting about? What should the police have done in this case? Let's say that law was on the books, and if you buy more than 20 guns in 6 months, the police come to your house, and then they ask what?
Well, as I say, they could have paid him a visit and say, why do you have the guns? Why are you buying all these guns? What's going on? And they might or might not have figured out that this guy was a lunatic, or the guy who shot up the gay bar. I mean, it goes on and on. We got so many lunatics out there.
Hold on. No, wait, hold on. Before you get back into generalities, since you're a law professor, I'm going to hold you to specifics. Then do what? I mean, because you're familiar with the concept of civil liberties. I mean, you're familiar with the Constitution. You can't punish someone for something he hasn't done, can you? Or are you suggesting that we do that?
No, you cannot. But the police know how many, the authorities know how many cars you have in your garage. They know all sorts of facts about you. Shouldn't they know if you have dozens of these guns? And that's not just the only point. How about these silencers that they're trying to push through? Why do we need silencers on guns?
Okay,
Is that for the mafia?
Okay, now you're revealing yourself as ignorant, so I'm going to stop you there so you don't embarrass yourself.
Ignorant?
But let's just hold on. Silencers had nothing to do. I mean, let's be real. But let's just back up 1 second. By using the same criteria, okay, but don't embarrass yourself. By using the same criteria you just laid out, Muslims are like 2% less percent of the population since 9/11. You know, the vast majority of terror deaths have been committed by Muslim men. If you've got a Muslim man who's very devout, that's a starker indicator by the numbers than buying guns. Should the police visit him and ask him about his commitment to global jihad?
I don't know what this has to do with Muslims or anyone else. If you've got a Christian who's associated with the Ku Klux Klan or a Muslim who happens to associate with ISIS, yes, but the vast majority of Muslims don't associate with ISIS.
The vast majority of people who buy a lot of guns don't shoot up concerts.
The bottom line is the police ought to know about the weapons.
And then do what? I mean, your suggestion is not very smart with respect. And then do what? You go to this guy's house. What do you have all these weapons? I don't know. I don't have to tell you that.
How to investigate threats to public safety. But I can assure you, if somebody is accumulating that many weapons and the police saw it, and someone important were coming in like the president of the United States, you bet they'd be looking into it. But they don't care when it comes to our families, my family. We want the police to be able to enforce the law.
I'm going to cut you off because you've got a job and you don't want to be embarrassed in front of your kids. Thank you, Professor, for coming on. Appreciate it. Well, the feud between the Trump administration and the NFL heated up again on Sunday after Vice President Pence walked out of a game in Indianapolis. Up next, we'll talk to a Republican congressman who says the anthem protests show it's a good time to cut off the NFL's tax exemption. You're subsidizing that league. Did you know that? Plus, we've got new information on last week's rampage in Las Vegas. We'll tell you it was just revealed. Very confusing new information. We don't know where it's leading, but you want to know about it, so stay tuned. We have new information just in this hour on last week's shooting in Las Vegas. At a news conference tonight, Las Vegas police substantially revised the storyline, the narrative of what happened the night that Stephen Paddock murdered 59 people. According to police tonight, Paddock began his rampage by shooting security guard Jesus Campos at the Mandalay Bay Hotel. That took place a full 6 minutes before he opened fire on the country music concert beneath his window. This, of course, reverses earlier reports that Campos was only shot after the end of the rampage, and it raises profound questions about what actually happened that night and why have police taken so long to pinpoint Paddock's location and what happened to Campos. It's all very confusing, and we're sure it'll become clearer by tomorrow night's show. We're going to keep you updated on the story along the way. Well, a month ago, ESPN anchor Jemele Hill called President Trump and his supporters white supremacists in a lengthy tirade on Twitter, which is the social media app that has destroyed many careers and reputations. ESPN declined to suspend her, and now it's paying the price. Hill seems to have determined to make the leap from covering sports to lecturing everyone on politics. Dallas Cowboys owner Jerry Jones recently said he would not tolerate any player who refused to stand for the anthem. In response to that, Hill called on fans to boycott the Cowboys' sponsors. ESPN, ever sensitive to anything to do with sponsors, has suspended Hill for 2 weeks. Imagine the trouble they could have avoided, though, if they had stuck to sports in the first place, as is their charter. And yet the NFL doesn't itself seem that much better at escaping political controversy. It seems to be courting it recently. On Sunday, the vice president walked out of a game in Indianapolis after players for the San Francisco 49ers protested the national anthem, suggested they hate America. The walkout was apparently done at the urging of President Trump, the VP's walkout. But one congressman is prepared to do a lot more than simply counter-protest the world's richest sports league. Congressman Matt Gaetz represents the state of Florida. He's a lead sponsor of a bill that would end various tax breaks that professional football enjoys. The congressman joins us tonight. Congressman, thanks a lot for coming on. So will you just give us a quick outline of what kind of taxpayer subsidy, in effect, the NFL enjoys?
Sure, the current millionaires and billionaires associated with professional sports leagues, including the NFL, have a tax exemption. They don't have to pay taxes. So that's special treatment that's not afforded to just regular folks in my district or the small businesses on Main Street throughout America. It's my belief that if the Congress is serious about getting rid of the loopholes and special interest giveaways in the tax code in the coming weeks, an easy place to start is by not subsidizing and not giving special treatment to professional sports leagues, particularly when the NFL league office has embraced this unpatriotic behavior.
I'm confused, though, as to why the Congress would be giving tax breaks to one of the most lucrative businesses in America whose employees are paid, in some cases, tens of millions of dollars a year. Why would we have that in the first place?
Well, Tucker, it's just more proof that the average American doesn't need a 70,000-page tax code. The tax code is littered with circumstances where special people and special interest and those with special access to members of Congress get treatment that everyday Americans don't get. That's why I'm proud that President Trump and Speaker Ryan want to have a tax code that's fair, simple, and works for all Americans. But it would seem ludicrous to leave in the tax code special treatment for professional sports leagues when they're not
not out there shutting down behavior that is not only unpatriotic, it's just an overgeneralized indictment. I mean, rather than taking a knee, we ought to see professional athletes taking a stand and actually supporting this country.
Right.
And if they've got grievances about specific policies, they should raise those with a solution in mind.
You know, I know you're a politician and everything, but everything you said is true as far about the tax code. That's exactly right. I can verify that as a longtime resident here. And I hope you get this done. Thank you, Congressman. A lot.
Thank you, Tucker.
Tech companies are getting so powerful, most people in D.C. are afraid to criticize them. How powerful? Another example coming up after the break. Republican Congresswoman Marsha Blackburn of Tennessee is running for Senate next year, but she's already having her campaign censored, not by the government, but by Silicon Valley. In her announcement video, Blackburn takes credit for stopping, quote, the sale of baby parts by abortion clinics. So Twitter, the app, banned that video. They called it, quote, an inflammatory statement that is likely to evoke a strong negative reaction, unlike everything else on Twitter. A tech company, in other words, has declared itself a censor, the arbiter of what you're allowed to see and hear and what an elected official is allowed to say. That's terrifying, whether you agree with Marsha Blackburn or not, and it cannot continue. There will be a breaking point. That's about it for us tonight. An hour's already gone by. We're sad. Every night at 8, though, we are on this show, the sworn enemy of lying, pomposity, smugness, and groupthink. Sean Hannity is next. Have a great night.
All right, thanks, Tucker. And